On the PLA corruption campaign, it is very different, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, Xi Jinping kind of has explained to everyone why it's different. If you go back to the first speech that he made when he did his first domestic inspection tour in Guangdong, or the speech he reportedly made, although I think it's pretty solid that he did indeed make it. One of the things he focused on was corruption in the Soviet armed forces and how the security services and the military had become lax, right? And I think it's easy for us as China modernizes and becomes, people focus more and more on China as China, the country. They also tend to think about the Chinese military as the country's military. It's not. It's the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. And their number one job is keeping the Communist Party in power and preventing a Ceausescu scenario, you know, these sort of things. That's the PLA's number one job, as demonstrated in 1989. And so if you look at what's happened in the corruption space, especially the case of Xu Caiho, right, but there are many others, what you had in effect was a guy in charge of PLA personnel for, and you know, a lot of the media has focused on the fact that he had a metric ton of cash in his basement and so on. That's a very, flashy achievement, and so it's easy for people to focus on that. But the real story is this notion that you had a guy running military personnel for 8 years who was in effect building a private army inside the armed wing of the Communist Party. These people were loyal to him, not to the party secretary. And I think sometimes it's helpful to think of the party from its Leninist point of view as a religion. And Xi Jinping is the chief priest of the religion. And so if you look at this situation where these guys who are supposed to defend you are corrupt and not reliable, that's a big problem. And I think the leadership saw this when they looked at the Egypt scenario and saw how quickly the military in Egypt turned on Mubarak, and they started to ask themselves, if we had to do 1989 over again, would these guys be responsive? And I think Xi Jinping, because of his background, having had actually something akin to military experience, the most among his colleagues, is very sensitive to that issue, and especially, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, how he sees himself as the savior of the party and so on. This is a key element, and so I would expect this to continue.
Would you agree, too, they're just simply afraid about what the fighting ability of the military Absolutely. In its simplest terms is?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, it's been, it's sort of like what Dr. Huang was saying in his remarks. There's been this weird, because most militaries that are as corrupt as the PLA appears to be don't have any fighting capacity, and yet the PLA seemed to straddle that line. They were doing real training, real exercises, improving their combat capability and so on. But I think, from early on when Xi Jinping was making comments like the PLA needs to be able to fight and win wars, this is the topic he was getting at.
Yeah.